All right, welcome to the theEWpodcast. I'm your host, Eric White, and today I am joined by Coach Gary Zarecky. Thanks for joining me, Coach.
Thank you for having me, Eric.
Yeah, so I've been looking forward to this conversation. This is kind of out of left field a little bit for me, a little different than the conversations I normally have on here, but as a big sports fan, I was excited to learn about you and talk to you about your story.
Well, I appreciate that. Been a while, but yes, I think I had a good run down in the San Diego area.
Yeah, so maybe we can just introduce yourself for your, I would say the United States International University Gulls, coaching their basketball team is probably what most people, if they know you, will know you from, right?
Well, yes, I believe so. As far as going national or broadening experience out of San Diego County. But when I was at Sweetwater High School, we built a nationally ranked high school team and produced quite a few Division I and Division II players, and actually we were ranked a few times number one in all the high schools down there. So that's how you ended up getting at USIU, because of the record we created at Sweetwater High School.
Mm-hmm. And the Sweetwater High School was a team that wasn't doing very well before you arrived, isn't that right?
Well, when I arrived, the school was approximately 50 years old, and I think it was built in 1922. And in the course of 50 years, they had only won 2 basketball championships back in the early 50s. And they were primarily known as a football school. Mm-hmm. But I think that's what motivated me, because watching the great football teams there and a lot of the top county football coaches inspired me to say that if they can do it, why can't I do it? Mm-hmm. With the type of athletes that were in National City. There was some world-class athletes that came out of that city down there. And so my initial attempt at coaching and building the program was not very good. I think my first season we won 2 or 3 and lost 24. So I was right in line with the history of the basketball programs down there. I took over a program that had won 0 games in 3 years. And about the only people that ever watched the games down there were the custodians and any passerbys who saw a game going on. And yet the football stadium was just overflow every Friday night. So I dug in and I went to work, and the more people laughed, joked, and said you can't do it, the more motivated I get. You heard a lot of stories like this about athletes and successful business people, entrepreneurs. The more you're discouraged, the more you want to succeed.
Yeah, for sure. And eventually you did succeed there, taking a 20-loss team to eventually be a 20-win team, correct?
Yeah, we won 17 championships. And for a while there, we held a lot of records in the county, and we had at one time 54 CIF records in the state of California. We were the first South Bay school to win a CIF. And back in those days, they didn't have a state championship like they do now. So you were rated by other sources like Cal High Sports. I think we ended up a couple years number 1 in the state of California through them. But I took the team, once we built the program, all over the world, and took on top teams from other countries, including Yugoslavia and Paris, Canada. And we went to the Punahou tournament several years in a row in Hawaii, where Obama went to school, big basketball school. And we won those tournaments, and we went probably to one of the top high schools ever in the United States called Hobbs High School, Hobbs, in New Mexico, which was one of the leading offensive programs and legendary high school coaches, Ralph Tasker. And we took a team there and ended up beating several Texas schools that were ranked and got to the championship against Hobbs in front of an overflow crowd and literally thousands of people trying to get into their high school arena. And we lost 98-94, which was amazing because they were number one in the country.
Yeah, and that's
we ended up. Yes.
Yeah, that's a hell of a high school score for basketball too. That's something I definitely found interesting in reading about you is obviously your coaching philosophy of kind of score fast and score often. I definitely want
to. I started out as a defensive coach because when I played high school ball, we had in the Sacramento area one of the top defensive high school coaches in the state, and so. Even though I played his philosophy and kind of carried it with me, I found it boring as a player. And I know that my teammates in the locker room wish we could have shot more rather than run plays. And you got two different types of coaches. You got coaches that want to dominate the game by showing you how smart they are on offensive playmaking and running plays and taking one shot. Then you got a kind of coaches that want to get up and down the floor. But if you want to build a program, you want kids to come out and play. And the number one thing that attracts kids is when the ball goes through the basket. Mm-hmm. All kids, everywhere, want to score. And if they just go out in their backyards, Eric, and just shoot a ball, they get such a rush when one of their shots goes in. And I'm sure you've had that happen to you too. So I started thinking about that. And then I started kind of getting involved with the NBA down in San Diego. I became friends with Rudy Tomjanovich down there. And I went to work for the San Diego. I believe at that time they were called the Clippers and then became the Rockets when they went to Houston. And I worked with Pete Newell down there, and I was always interested in why the NBA scored so many points and attracted so much attention, yet they would say that the best defensive teams gave up 98 points a game. I started thinking about that, and I said, if you score 110 and you give up 98, and the 98's the best defensive team in the league, then you're looking at the offensive side probably winning more games. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I used to tell people when I started developing an offense was that if you wanted to go watch a basketball game, Eric, and you saw that the final score was 60-50, which is even common today. Mm-hmm. And then another game was played, and it was 110-100. So you got 60-50, and you got 110-100. Which game would you rather watch?
Yeah, definitely the higher scoring game.
I think even the purist would say that. But then the question I always ask when I used to speak around the country is, who played defense in those games? 60-50 and 110-100. Who played defense?
Well, it's probably a trick question, but my gut reaction.
Both teams play defense because the margin of victory was 10 points in each game. It was just a different style of offense. But then people will say, well, you give up 100 points. Well, if you're averaging 110 points, you're probably going to have a great record. Mm-hmm. But 60-50 only really generates a lot of interest in the powerful Division I and even high schools because you have a lot of purists there with a lot of tradition. Mm-hmm. San Diego, I always told people when I started out, is a basketball hotbed, because there was a lot of interest in high school basketball in San Diego. I mean, there were empty gyms, but some of the powerhouse programs were always full. And the press enjoyed covering the high school games. And when you get down to, say, the top 20 all-time programs down there, they produced a lot of Division I players. And they attracted a lot of interest nationally. And as a result, I used to say, why couldn't this be done at San Diego State and University of San Diego? And I told people it's going to happen because, well, it's a little old beach town. It's not really that big of a beach town. The people who go to the beaches are really a minority of the people who live down there. So they don't have to be basketball fans. But I think once you start winning, everybody gets on board.
Yeah.
And I think San Diego State's proved that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think of teams in the NFL, even teams like the LA Chargers, for example, who, didn't have much of a fan base for a couple of years in LA, even San Diego, but now that they're a powerhouse team, a team to be reckoned with in the NFL, it seems like everyone's a fan.
Oh, yeah. And it didn't take long for San Diego State to finally catch on that, if you win, they will come. And when they started seeing that happening, the first thing they had to do was get rid of that old gym, which we used to play high school games in. We used to have such big crowds against Morris High School that we could fill that gym, which we did several times. And we had quite a few people go to the sports arena when we played there. So there was a lot of interest. And I always felt that one of the things you had to do was attract kids, play the sport. And one way you did that is you started emphasizing offense. And when I was at USIU, I was shocked to learn, even though I had an idea, that it isn't so much the coaching and playing at the Division I levels as it is how much money does your school have? Because to keep the top coaches and to get the top players, you have to have an organization that's bent on marketing and business. And therefore, if you want to compete, and it's rare today for mid-Division I teams to compete, but we all cheer for them, you really have to have a lot of money. And when you go to some of these Division I schools, which I'm sure you've been to, I've been to most of them, and you see the locker rooms, and you see the arenas, and you see the housing on campus, and the television rights to these games, you understand why kids go there. But, when you thought about USIU, we had to play our first games in a high school. We had no gym. The reason I took the job was that behind the president of USIU was this big rendition of a new arena they were going to build on the USIU campus, which was a beautiful site. So that attracted me. And I thought, there's going to be an arena coming. Well, it never happened. The tragedy of USIU, you probably know.
Yeah, and we can get into that a little bit more just shortly. I want to kind of linger on the basketball philosophy aspect. And you coached at USIU, United States International University, which it's funny. I have a lot of friends who are from San Diego, don't remember that school ever. And that's because I guess it probably went bankrupt, went under before they were really paying attention. But you were coaching there from the mid to late 80s, early 90s, correct? And at that time there was, I guess, a shift to a more fast-paced offense, at least in the NBA, with like the Showtime Lakers, who were really about transition offense and showy baskets. Was that do you think that's a correct assessment of basketball at that time? And if so, did you see similar offenses to yours being run in college, or were you kind of ushering in that sort of mentality to college basketball?
Well, I like to think of myself back then as a student of the game. And I used to go to conferences all over the country. And talk to coaches and get formulated my ideas. Ralph Tasker at Hobbs High School sat down with me, and I used to talk to some of the top coaches back east, Martyr Day, for example, and we all came to the conclusion that what really excites people, number one, is winning, but number two is watching the ball go through the basket. So what I did was kind of weird. I fundraised a lot down there because the kids in National City didn't have a lot. So I started using my own credit card till I couldn't do that to get them shoes and things like that. And there's a lot of coaches who did that. But I started realizing National City was full of a lot of businesses. So I went door to door, and it was difficult. And there's a lot of people who don't want to fundraise. There's a lot of people who don't know how to fundraise. And especially in education, there's a lot of skeptics, and there's a lot of naysayers. And so fundraising helped me develop my offensive philosophy because I had some money that was donated to our program, all legal. Eventually, I ended up raising a little over $1 million for the basketball program at Sweetwater High School when I was there. And that's unbelievable, if not over the top. And to fundraise that much money, I had to have a lawyer, an accountant. I had to keep the district apprised. I had to talk to the CIF locally and statewide because nobody believed you could do that much money. So what happened when I had money, I started looking around on things I could do to improve the program other than just helping all the players. So I looked into fixing up the gym. Districts sometimes don't have monies to redo bleachers. They don't have monies to redo the floor, paint the inside of the wall. So I went to work on that. When you fundraise, you got three types of fundraising, Eric. You've got cash or checks, you've got services, and you've got goods. Those are the three types of fundraising. So if I couldn't get cash donations, I went to electricians, and I went to painters, and I went to carpenters, and went to the district, and I had things fixed up. Well, one of the things, to answer your question about offense, is there were some guys that were into computers, techies, that were located throughout various parts of San Diego. So I went to this one company, and I wanted them to diagram on the floor where the shots would occur within 7 seconds after you rebounded. And I had this one guy, his name escapes me right now, but he spent hours with me listening to what I was saying, like you are, saying, okay, we got the rebound, we're headed down the floor, we're not going to pass the ball, we're going to dribble it. I want the ball up in the air in 7 seconds. I want it shot. So where is that going to occur? So that costs some money, and that's one of the things I did with fundraising money to put in to my philosophy. And the donors thought it was great. Because you were doing something that really made sense to improve the game. So then I put it into practice, and I developed a bunch of drills, full court, half court. I developed a philosophy that big men like Giannis can dribble down the floor and get it there as quick as a point guard. Whereas back in those days, when you rebounded, you waited for your point guard to come back and get the ball. Mm-hmm. And many teams who said they were defensive teams, I learned that Division I really weren't defensive teams. They just had bad offenses. So that if you see a team that's holding somebody to 52 points, and you realize they walk the ball up the court, then they pass it 6 or 7 times, and you only take one shot, no wonder you're not averaging a lot of points. So one of the things I did at USIU was, once I got it going at the high school level, we averaged almost 100 points a game in San Diego County without a 3-point shot.
Wow.
back in those days. And we got the ball up the floor in 7 seconds. We were organized. And one of the things that used to really offend me was when people said, "Oh, yeah, you're the coach that has the run and gun philosophy." It's not run and gun. It's run and shoot. And it's organized, not chaos. And I think we proved it both at USIU and Sweetwater that whenever we took on top teams with top coaches, they couldn't stop us. And here's a good story for you, Eric. Bobby Dye, you remember him?
I don't.
He was a defensive coach. Bobby Dye was known as one of the top defensive coaches in the country at Division I. And I believe when I called him, he was leading the nation in defense, giving up about 51 points a game. I think he was at Boise State. He had a beautiful arena. So I asked him, and we were averaging, my second year at USIU, we led the nation in scoring. And that was Division I. We averaged about 98 points a game. But we were the worst defensive team in the nation. But my philosophy was, when you open the newspapers and you're Eric in the Midwest or the East Coast, and you're looking at scores, and you see that Syracuse beat a low Division I team 91-37, it doesn't do anything for you other than somebody got slaughtered.
Yeah.
But when you open up the newspaper and you see that Syracuse beat USIU 182-151, all of a sudden you stop eating and you read that article.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden I realized that when the national stats go out and when the stats go out for the high school programs every week or every month, they always will list what the top offensive team is, and they will list what the top defensive team is, but they will never list what the worst defensive team is or the worst offensive team. So kids read that. And when they see at the top of the list that USIU is leading the nation in scoring, they at least allow you through the front door to talk to them and their parents. Because you're an offensive coach. And the kids love that. So I felt it was cheaper for us to score points and draw some attention than it was for us to try to play at Division I and play traditional ball, especially without facilities and money. And it paid off because just before USI went bankrupt, we got rated by USA Today like 161 out of 313 colleges. We moved up over 100 points in the ratings because of our scoring and attracting some players. I had 2 All-Americans at USIU. 2 All-Americans. One was Joey Yesbeck. He was an All-American, 2 or 3 polls, and the other one, of course, was Kevin Bradshaw. Mm-hmm. And it started to work, and I was getting top players. I was going to New York. I was going down to Florida. I went to Chicago. And all of this was I fundraised at USIU, which allowed me to use the monies to try to keep up with the big boys and recruit the whole country. I even went overseas, and we had a campus in Africa, believe it or not, in Kenya, and we had a campus in London. And from taking Sweetwater to Yugoslavia, we went to Yugoslavia and played the top high school teams. We were the first American high school team to ever play in then the Eastern European countries. We took on all of their top teams that were the age of our players, and we went, I think we went 8-1, and only lost at their big, huge arena in Belgrade because they homered us, and the other team shot 67 free throws, and we shot 10.
Oh yeah, that'll do it.
So that's my philosophy of building, was when I had the guy help me with the computers and diagram, and then pretty soon after you started scoring, you got invited to talk all around the country about how you build a program fundraising and how do you build an offensive team.
Yeah. So would you say it's safe to kind of summarize your philosophy as looking at the offensive approach, the score fast and often approach, as more so focused on attracting attention and funds to then attract the right kids to win, or was winning your first intention with that? Because it seems to me like winning was almost a secondary thing, and it was more so about getting eyes on USIU and getting attention from maybe top recruits in the country or top fundraisers, as opposed to putting together, a 850 winning percentage or something.
Well, you're partially right. Yeah, you're right on. Except that I think winning was my number one priority that was burning inside of me. I knew if I kept with it, and of course the president of the university and all of the athletic people were behind me, because all of a sudden USIU started getting crowds. We weren't matching San Diego State, and we weren't matching USD, but we probably went up several 100% in attendance at our games, even though we started in a high school, then we went to a JC, then we actually got an idea to build an arena downtown San Diego. And we put that together, and we had a beautiful arena in Golden Hall, which is right downtown San Diego. That hall became available by the city because they didn't have the funds to keep it going. It was approximately 6,500 theater seats and a big wide open floor. So what I did is I told the university, let me fundraise. Let me go out and get good services and things, and let's put an arena in. And so we got a floor donated from the LA Clippers, and we had all kinds of things, scoreboards and seats and tables. And it was beautiful. In fact, they played the CIF championship game there one year, where Sweetwater and my old coaches won it. But you see pictures of it and some of the things that we have, and that started the fans coming. Well, just before the bankruptcy, we went up that high in USA Today ratings because I had attracted some top players. Kevin Bradshaw being one of them. And so we were on the verge of going, and then the bankruptcy hit, and wow, parents pulled some of my starters out of school, and from there it was just downhill into the abyss, and we became known as one of the only schools to go bankrupt in Division I history.
Yeah, that's crazy ending.
Yeah, it really was. It was sad.
Yeah.
It was sad for everybody.
Well, how did you end up in this position to begin with? We just kind of got to the end of the story, but let's go back to the very beginning. How did you end up a basketball coach? I know you've written law books in the past. You've had a crazy motorcycle accident that maybe we can talk about. How does someone who writes law books become a basketball coach that's traveling around the world?
Well, when I was in college, I went to Chico State undergraduate up here. I was raised in the Sacramento area. Loved basketball, and my brother too, and so we played that as one sport guys. And I had a burning desire to be a juvenile court judge, and I had a burning desire to be a basketball coach. And I did know that someday in the future they were going to collide, and I didn't know if I could do both. So I ended up in San Diego because I went to the University of San Diego Law School where I got accepted, and I was accepted up here in the Bay Area by some law schools. So I went down there and was a lifeguard for a while, and I finally got hired by the Sweetwater District, and I was a junior high school teacher at Castle Park Junior High for 2 years, where we won 2 junior high championships. We went 10-0 each season, playing outdoors. And I went to law school, and I was just drained. I mean, I was just burned out. I almost made it through 2 years, and then what ended my dream of law school. And I knew that I needed a break. Was the job at Sweetwater came open, and so there was my chance to go up to the high school. And I'd been in the district a couple of years. I didn't know there was going to be so much interest in it. Back in those days, when you had a full-time basketball coaching job, there were a lot of people who applied for those jobs. And I think I went up against 15 or 16 people. Interviews went well. So I got the job, and then the dean of the law school had read it in the paper. I was hired at Sweetwater Heights, so she called me in and she said, you're struggling a little bit. You're not far away from graduating, but how is this going to impact you going to law school? And I said, oh man, I don't know what. I'm conflicted about this. So she says, why don't you take a year off? Take a year off, we'll hold your space, and make up your mind what you want to do. So reluctantly, I did that, but it was one of the best decisions I ever made. So I started coaching at Sweetwater with law on the back burner. But then something interesting happened when I got teaching in National City. It was a pretty rough school. And it was, back in those days, considered close to an inner city school. A lot of gangs and violence and drugs, and it was everywhere, a rough area. And I started learning that these kids, and basically a lot of people, Eric, never had basic law classes or understanding of jails and prisons, and no idea about juvenile court record sealing and misdemeanors and felonies. So I had an idea. I wonder if I could start a program teaching this. So I went to the district. They seemed to be semi-interested, but would it attract kids as an elective? So they gave me a green light to have a pilot program. So I called the state of California, and back in those days, they had teaching credentials where you can only teach subjects that are on your credential. And they were for life. So I asked if I could teach law. And they said you had to have at least 35 graduate units to have a minor to teach. So they put me through a rigorous review examination. I was granted a teaching credential in law, which allowed me to teach up to through junior college, but you could actually teach in state colleges if you had experience. I didn't have at the time. Later, I had enough where I started teaching. I taught some classes at San Diego State, taught for UCLA, and taught for a lot of community colleges, law programs. And that caused me to be attracted to write stuff. So I ended up writing quite a few legal booklets and basic formats for teachers and students and programs, and it just took off. And it became one of the top awarded classes in the United States. We had 7 Freedom Foundations Awards from Washington, D.C. We had usually 60 kids a class, which was too much, but that just delighted the district. And so it took off from there. So I was able to coach, and then my second love was law, and it turned into teaching law. So I ended up teaching various law classes for 17 years. And even after I got out of coaching. So that's that story. And then I put all my time, since I wasn't going to law school, into coaching. And that's how all of that began.
Wow.
It
Quite
was
a
amazing.
journey. Yeah.
It was.
So it sounds like then you were able to kind of, you mentioned that those two worlds were eventually going to collide, but it sounds like you were able to keep a leg in each world in a certain way.
Yeah, I actually lost interest in becoming an attorney or a juvenile court judge because I was working with a lot of lawyers and teaching, and I was working um, with people who were in the police fields, and I had the luxury of being in two professions and learning from the top in each profession to formulate my career and philosophies. So it really worked out, and it was hard, but I was able to keep my teaching during the day at Sweetwater and building the program there, and able to do all my afternoon and evening in basketball besides the writing. I would write till 3:00 in the morning. And I wrote with a couple of attorneys, and one of them, Bill McCarty, was one of the best writers I ever met, and he wrote for the California bar. And he was a top lawyer in San Diego. So when we decided he approached me at a conference. He was interested in writing some stuff with me for education for people to use. I met with him, and he says, I want you to write what you would like put into a book form or whatever. So I did. And we would meet at 3 a.m. in downtown San Diego and write together for 3 hours before school. And he said I was the worst writer he ever saw. He said, I can't believe how bad you are. So he spent hours, weeks, and months and years turning me into a writer.
Oh.
And today, I think I write well. And it also helped me in basketball, too.
Yeah, I can imagine. Helping you think in different ways. And, writing is, of course, good for organizing your thoughts. I'm sure that had some impact in your ability to come up with new ideas on the court or form the offense that you eventually formed.
Yes, and it helped because I did write articles for various basketball magazines on offense and things like that. And then when I think one of the greatest learning experiences coaches have in high school and junior college is when they have top players, All-Americans, and I had 3 All-Americans in high school. When you have that quality of athlete, all of a sudden you start having all the top coaches in the country showing up at your home. Mm-hmm. And they used to spend the night, and we'd go out to dinners and lunches. And you're talking about Duke and Notre Dame and North Carolina and UCLA and John Wooden. And you get to sit down with them. They come to your games. And so you get hooked up with people that help formulate all kinds of things, especially how you build basketball programs. And then the same thing applies in law because I learned so much by hiring National City Police as my assistant coaches at Sweetwater. And I had them on the bench. And some of them stayed with me and are still friends of mine today and taught me a lot about police work. And I eventually taught some classes at Southwest College that were built into the San Diego Police Academy, teaching young police officers to be criminal law and criminal procedure. So I see how it just spills over. But one thing I wanted to mention, since you're talking about what motivated me in a lot of these things, is my basketball career was ended at Chico State my junior year when a kid ran a red light and hit me in my little motorbike. I was coming home from practice. That accident almost took my life. It's said I should be dead today. I had both my hands severed. One of them was lying separate from my body in the street, lost 7 quarts of blood, 39 broken bones, went through the car itself where the fan tore up my hands, my arms, my femur came out. Surgery. I was in a coma for 2 days. They eventually operated 6 doctors for 12 hours, 2 doctors from Stanford who called my parents, who read that I had severed limbs, and they wanted to try a new procedure on me at Chico. So a doctor from Stanford named Jarrett was trying to come up with a way to sew limbs back on people, especially military people. And he came up with a thing called nerve tracing. And I was one of the early guinea pigs. And they told my folks that they allowed me to be the guinea pig. They would not charge me to try to save my hands. So they did. I lost feeling in half of my right hand. But I think I was in the hospital for almost a year in cast. That's a hard thing to do back in those days. And I lied there in bed watching the seasons change, feeling sorry for myself at first, but then getting mad when they said, you may not walk, or you may not do this or that. So I got madder and madder. And you've read stories like this from people. Mm-hmm. And you get motivated and nothing appears you can't do. You go back to that accident. You say, I survived. I can do this. That's what motivated me to build everything I've done.
That's incredible.
And I graduated on stage, and they pulled me up on a wheelchair. And it was the first time I stood up in front of 5,000 people. I walked for the first time to the microphone. And that was just such a touchy moment in my life. It just carried over to this very day. And that's what I used to tell all my young players. You get knocked down, you got to get up. You have a better life than you think you have because you're alive. And I used to use that in all my lectures. But it really was used a lot when I was coaching to motivate young people. Mm-hmm. And of course, they wanted to see your hands. They wanted to see the scars, and it was crazy.
Yeah.
But to this day, they remember a lot of that. Off topic, but it kind of tells you what's inside you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's it's not hard to imagine a scenario where your response is the exact opposite, and we end up not being here to have this conversation. Maybe you listened to the people who were telling you weren't going to walk again, or that you would never be the same person, and it sounds like that sort of external doubt from other people was motivating, not just in this circumstance, but as you mentioned before, also in your coaching. And I just wonder, is that something that's been with you your whole life? Is that something you developed? Is that something you think people can learn? Like, how do you develop that kind of resilience? Where does that come from?
Well, it's interesting. That happened back in the late 60s, that accident. And since that time, I've been inspired by all the media, obsessions and interest in vets who've lost limbs and people who have survived or seen death or whatever, these near-death experiences, which I actually was interviewed about in the hospital. Found out I did have in and outs of seeing death and coming back from it. It was written up. But I think more than anything else, I'm inspired by all the people today, especially military people. My dad was in the military, who survived these horrific things we hear about today. And I identify with them. And if you ever hear some of them talk about how it changed their lives, mirrors exactly what happened to me and how motivated some of them become. But I think what's more important is that people like us who had tremendous injuries can use that to motivate a lot of other people. And I used to use it with gang kids in National City to tell them what it means to have one life and what it means to be like on the other side and what it means to be like to treasure what you have rather than trying to ruin it. Some of the things they did, a lot of young kids gave me credit for getting them out of gangs. And I cherish that to this day. So yes, it has stuck with me. And it's interesting when people hear about it. And of course, even the reporters who used to write about it, some of them nationally, always wanted to see my hands. Thought that was, are you telling the truth? You know?
Yeah, it sounds almost made up, you know?
It does. And yet you say to yourself, if this guy is making this up, how could he do that? Really, to make up something like this, you have to experience it. You know, you're not a fiction writer. So you either have had to been there or have to be the greatest story liar in the history of mankind. But I find a lot of people who have had tremendous experiences and can give you facts and answer your questions. They don't make it up. And I think one thing that also inspired me is I would go down occasionally to the vet hall in National City, and I enjoyed talking with vets who had lost arms and legs, and I try to motivate them and tell them about my story. And it was always a feel-good thing. When I was coaching up here in Northern California, I got involved with the wheelchair basketball program up in the Los Altos area, and it just fascinated me how these soldiers lost arms and legs and yet could play armchair basketball by just using their head. So there's all kinds of motivating stories out there. But you really can't make some of this stuff up, Eric. You know, it's amazing, but like even to this day, talking to you about it right now, it brings back so many ideas. It motivates me today. I'm fired up right now. Let's go coach. Let's go play.
Yeah. Are you still connected to the game at all?
Say that again, please.
Are you still connected in any way to the game or to your former players?
Well,
like, what does your relationship to basketball look like today?
Okay, well, I had a lot of camps. I had camps down in San Diego. I had large basketball camps for a high school coach, and I came up here. I had the largest basketball camps except for Stanford. I was right behind Stanford. I'd have 500 to 800 kids a summer. So I stayed connected there, and when I was down in the San Diego area, I worked John Wooden's camps, which was hard to get into. He only had 5 or 6 high school coaches a year, and he was a big inspiration in my life. But I did get associated with the Los Angeles Lakers, and Jerry West was my favorite player when I was a high school player. So I became a Laker fan 55 years ago, and I ended up working for the organization in various odd kind of jobs. I helped run Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's camp at San Diego State for 2 years. I got to be around Kareem. And I was friends with Rudy Tomjanovich and Calvin Murphy, if you remember him. And I worked at Riley's camps in L.A. So I became a real dedicated, loyalist Laker fan. And in my camps up here, I had some Lakers that were guests in my camps. Jeff Lamp being one of the main ones. He was a Mr. Kentucky, and he scored. He averaged good points for the Lakers back in the days. I don't know if you remember him. So I'm a Laker fan, and my wife's a Warrior fan. So I'm in trouble this year.
Yep.
I keep my mouth shut, but I tell people in Northern California, I'm not a Warrior fan. I'm not against them, but I'm like most Laker fans. We're loyal to the Lakers, and I was pretty distraught last year.
Yeah.
But I stay a Laker fan.
Yeah. It's hard to root for the Lakers this year. They didn't make it easy.
It was terrible. Yeah. But I hope the Warriors do well. I'd like to see them win the championship, but next year when the season's over, I'm back to the Lakers.
Yep. Yeah, well, I'll be pulling for the Heat tonight, and hopefully Heat against the Warriors, but we'll see.
It'll be a good game. But anyway, that's a lot. I still hear from a lot of players. And my daughter, who lives up in the Portland area, Tara, she's a big part of the Sweetwater program back in the days when we were at Sweetwater. So she's kind of the watchdog on the internet for me, and players trying to contact me because I don't go on the internet, Twitters and Instagrams and Facebook and all that stuff. So she does that for me. And when players email her or Facebook her, they want to talk to me. So I spend a lot of time talking to a lot of my ex-players. And it's very rewarding. One of the things you don't know, and I know coaches will tell you this, even the great coaches, is that when you start coaching, Eric, you never think as a 22, 23-year-old coach that you're going to really impact kids all the way through their 50s and 60s. You don't look at it that way. You look at impacting them then, now. Mm-hmm. And it just becomes almost like a shock to all of us coaches that 50 years later, they have tears talking to you, or they relate the stories and how you changed their lives. And even the great ones, the ones that go into the pros and give their coaches credit. We never think about that. We never once think about what's going to be like 50 years from now. Mm-hmm. And when it happens, it adds years to your life.
Yeah.
It really does.
Well, I think that's a stuck landing there for the end. It seems like a good place to end it. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today, Coach. Your story is truly inspirational, one of a kind life and living. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to share it here.
Well, it was nice doing this, and you did a good job. And I hope some of this just, maybe causes interest to some of your listeners. But believe it or not, none of it's been exaggerated. I probably left out some good parts and some funny stories, but I hope that it worked for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully, they need to make the ESPN 30 for 30 about this.
And we were at one time approached for them about that. There was a movie made about Kevin Bradshaw that's online that did very well called Shooting for Home, and that's on Amazon. So we got it a lot. Even today, Eric, I'll end it with this. It's been 30, 40 years ago, and USIU is a good 25 years ago, and even up to this day, we get contacted by writers and people wanting to know the USIU story, and there have been big articles written on the internet about it, and it's up to this very moment, it's still alive. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a crazy story, and I will definitely make sure to include links to some of the articles I read before talking to you in the details the description for this episode. So if people want to learn more, they can go through those stories that I found really fascinating.
I tell you one story that was probably the best done was done in 2018 by a New York sports writer. It's on what's that thing called?
Fansided. Fansided.
Yeah. If you go on Fansided and you Google USIU, it's a huge story about USIU being the best show in college basketball.
Yeah, that article does a good job of detailing beginning, middle, and end of the program.
Right, he did a great job. Well, I appreciate it, Eric, and someday maybe we'll chat again.